Charlie Murder is a game about murdering innocent bystanders and getting away with it, grabbing them, throwing them, shooting them, and overall doing whatever the fuck you want to them until they explode into a bloody mess, a bloody pile of blood goop. Lots of blood, lots of goop. The best way to explain it is called fanatic dismemberment, because Jesus Christ. Speaking of Jesus Christ, this game is about religion and God, and the enemies in this game are on another level of purity, as you can tell by size and lack of skin. Oh, and did I mention there are guns, drugs, alcoholism, tattoos, a geometric skill issue, misogyny, cigarettes, bread, vehicular manslaughter, birds, broken physics, and way too many children. So if you ever wanted to murder a child, then you should totally watch this video to the end, since I only show the best and most complex parts of this game. Anyways, we should probably start off with the lore so you can have the basics understandings of this game, since the lore is personally the best part of this game and was by no means made by somebody with below 10 IQ. Anyways, the game starts off 6 months prior to when the game actually starts, and it's here where the game really starts because we have a guy named Paul Blart, Mall Cop, who plays a big ukulele and is chilling with his best friend, Johnny Depp Murder, and his friends, Olive Garden Breadstick, and Woman, who starts breaking into song as one does while staring at a television screen, until his two other friends, God and this guy is irrelevant, who then transforms the room into a concert. But Paul Blart ain't too happy about it because he plays a ukulele and it doesn't fit well with Johnny Depp's pitch-perfect vocals that are not at all unpleasant to hear, especially if you had to do this section twice. Now, as a deaf man, pointed out by this figure above his head, he tested out if he really is deaf by shattering his ukulele, and turns out he is, because that is exactly what a guitar would sound like if it was smashed against a concrete floor. But he's not ready to give up just yet, so with his smashed ukulele, he decided to look up to one of his favorite composers, Beethoven, and while he's doing that, it just happens that Johnny Depp and his band of non-virgins is playing the most Australian song possible on the TV above him, which makes Paul Blart mad since he couldn't hear all the Australian slurs. And we're going to ignore this dogshit poster Paul made since his only talent is in music. Speaking of music, Paul is incapable of making music since a few months after Johnny Depp's member, God, decided to yeet a television out the window in an act of defenestration, and it just so happens to land on the ukulele. In a rage, Paul Blart resigns from being a mall cop and prays to the Antichrist in order to bring back his ukulele and destroy Johnny Depp's gang for their misuse of a television, turning him into the sequel, Paul Blart, Mall Cop 2. There should have never been a sequel. And with his newfound ability, he set on a murder spree to fix his broken ukulele and take down Johnny Depp and his crew of homunculus. In the process of doing this, he sets fire to the building they are performing at, which kills all of them except one, since a lucky paramedic was on the scene to revive him. The rest of them are dead, do not question it. Now let me introduce you to our main character, God. Yes, his name is God, and it's because he ate him and gained the ability to pull out a sub-dimensional drum set from within his belly button pocket dimension. Don't fact check that. Anyways, after chilling with Lucifer, he's revived from the dead via a paramedic and therefore has taken up the quest to destroy Paul Blart, the sequel. There should have never been a sequel, and avenge his loyal band of crippling alcoholics. It's here where we get into the gameplay, or the combat of the game, which if you haven't noticed is quite 2D since the game is a 2D game, which means spacing is excellent and not at all confusing. Now, a game that does this a lot better is Raid Shadow Legends, which is kind of like this game where you could choose between characters, but instead they call them champions, and there are over 600 of them, which brings a true console level experience to your phone, since all these champions are in HD, and after establishing themselves as a leader in mobile and PC games, they continue to add content and game modes every few months, such as the Doom Tower, hundreds of bosses and heroes, the Shadowkin faction, the Hydra Clan boss, which will wreck your team, and of course, boogie dancing. But besides those, my favorite part of the game is fighting bosses while underleveled so I can see my characters do the flop. There's also new features called Awakening, which allow your champions to choose a powerful blessing, and a brutal new dungeon, the Iron Twin Fortress. And if you log in for 7 consecutive days between now and October 27th, you get the Ultimate Death Knight champion. You could also use the promo code DK Rises to get free stuff. We like free free stuff. Anyways, be sure to click my link in the description or scan my QR code, which is on the screen, and get unique bonuses, including a free epic champion, Anya, 200k silver, 1 energy refill, 1 XP boost, and 1 ancient shard, up to $30 worth. Anyways, thank you, Raid. Now back to the combat of Charlie Murder, the game. The combat can really be described in 2 letters, which is X and Y. X does jabs and Y does a weird ass uppercut. And every other combat element is irrelevant, since there are all variations of this very simple XY concept, besides the B button, which can be used to grab the enemy and yeet them into an electrical outlet, or a saw trap, or a pool of acid, whichever you want. But besides the B button, the X and Y button are what we're going to be using the entire game, and that will not become repetitive at all, especially if you needed to play the game twice. Anyways, the combat is quite elusive, since most of the enemies punch back and can sometimes put you in an indefinite suspension of attacks, which will kill you instantly. And dying means spamming more X's and Y's like a transgender man till you make it back and hope it doesn't happen again. But luckily, besides the 2 fists given to you, you can use weapons. Whatever you can pick up, you can use. The best of these weapons include the guns, since nobody can train their body and spirit to a bullet, especially children. Especially children. Especially children. Anyways, we can use these weapons to give us a systematic advantage towards the enemies of this game. And speaking of the enemies, they're absolutely terrifying and not something to be played with. They don't fuck around when it comes to the damage aspect and are not at all reskins of the past enemies. But besides that, they are quite fierce unless you can pull out a drum set from your pocket dimension to summon all sorts of weapons which you can use on them, or use the drum set's ability to infect yourself with obesity, and not just any obesity, morbid obesity. Now that we've gotten the basic assessment of the combat of the game, it's now time to dive into the skill tree / leveling up, and shit like that, since it's quite important to understand what the fuck is going on. Basically, we have a skill that we can whip out of our IMAX Pro smartphone, which happens to include a Gmail and a Twitter. I don't know why, but the skill you get can be quite the good, since they help you develop as a character and keep your sanity when having to reset back to a checkpoint. Anyways, these skills include the ability to give personalized lobotomies to anybody who falls on the floor, the ability to give cranial augmentations, rip people's heart to fix our cannibalistic tendencies, and the ability to smash a man / woman, because I'm not sexist, into the floor as hard as physically possible for the sake of fixing a headache. And with these skills that we can acquire throughout the game, we can truly see the development of God. Speaking of the development of God, this game gives you the ability to dress in drag. And what I mean by that is it gives you peak level fashion skills. You know, the ones that make you go sheesh, and the ones that make you question if you're a furry. But it's all for a reason, which are these green numbers, which signifies your ability to take hits and do damage. And then eventually find something that has a bigger green number, and we like bigger green numbers, so we can sell the ones with icky yucky red numbers in an act of making money. Speaking of making money, this game runs on a capitalistic macroeconomical instinct of supply and demand, since we're the only person left in this lackluster world, and because of this, we can purchase things at a low price, especially alcohol, a severe amount of alcohol. And because the demand is so high for us, we can sell our already worn gear for an inflated price, which will eventually turn us into a rich man in colonial America standards. Speaking of America, fuck it. Leveling up in this game is quite simple. You beat up innocent people and you gain followers via the Twitter app, which allows you to level up your strength, speed, defense, and anarchy. And while you might think it's important what you level up, the answer is nay, since the game caps you on what you level up, and alcohol has the ability to give you stat points. So you best believe I rocked max stats the entire game through acute alcohol intoxication. But that doesn't mean the game was easy by any means, since there are way too many geometry issues that lie about. Falling in this game is quite frequent and not at all the game's fault, since the shadow prevalent throughout our character justifies the game's object placement, which, may I add, do not have a shadow, and therefore by definition of art, floating in a 2D abyss of nothingness in the middle of the screen, and are therefore solitary objects in space, and are therefore very hard to pass, and are therefore by definition anti-LGBTQIAW. But like I said, this is not at all the game's fault whatsoever, and instead our character God's fault for being so large and slightly Canadian. But object placement isn't the only issue with the geometry, since there are a few sections in which your character rides a perfectly diagonal waterfall, which would be more apparent if the waterfall wasn't at the corner of the screen and causing me visual impairment. To make things even better, there are objects you have to avoid while sliding, which are not at all hard to see and is instead an intended feature used to level up your IRL Ultra Instinct. Now, after understanding the mechanics that make up our character's body dysmorphia and going over the gameplay, we can now dive into the actual game. Our first location after being revived is called Art Street, since it's where the enemies start coming out the closet. This is because they are dressed in a way in which you'd assume from their appearance that they have just came out the closet. And what I mean by that is that their fit is fire and well ironed, and one might even say wrinkle-free. Basically, they're gay, and because they are gay, we have to kill them because we're God. The Catholic kind. And once we finish up with the closeted men, we start rocking it with ninjas, sexual style on the dance floor, where we then proceed to fight one of the pagan gods, Loki, who runs away like a bitch. And now we have to deal with street violence and a hamburger before we go to Demonetization Forest, where people are forced to play, hangman, and if you touch these black figures, you're forced to play it too, and you get demonetized. So if you'd like a better picture, you should watch Logan Paul's video on the matter. Anyway, skimming past the Demonetization Forest, we fight a woman who likes to tase balls. But luckily for us, God has shockproof balls from all the CBT he receives in heaven. But besides that, we continue on to defy the very laws of gravity and defeat a mecha, which was no match for God's click speed. And after this, we are taken to a literal castle where we fight your mother, which is clearly an atheist and has to die. But she runs off and we get tricked to stand on this very obvious metal sheet, which sends us into the plague since there are rats and they are bubonic. There are also shopping carts, which is our biggest weakness besides gravity. And also there's this scientist guy who owns a cisgender, which is alright with our Catholic beliefs, so I let it live and murdered the scientist in its place, which leads us to an ordeal of a perfectly made waterfall, which leads us to fighting fucking pirates. You heard me right. Johnny Depp murder didn't get the contract with Disney, and now they're taking it out on God. But once the pirates are taken care of, we have to take care of one of my Discord mods, who are all very overweight and against global warming. But as God, we don't believe in global warming, so we dock at Crab Island and then immediately murder a Turkish man and fire his child off to do things I can't talk about without being demonetized. The best way to explain it is we're trying to get a key to demolish a playground because we are anti-baby pillin', and from here we are administered into a pediatrician's office with way too many hospital beds and way too many children. And also Jigsaw is here with Purity Lady, and she's very susceptible to a bullet. And now we can venture our way to McDonald's, which is practicing child labor, and since we are Karen, we need to politely speak to the manager about this, and then find our way in a garage of some kind where we race a dude in an 18-wheeler with a fucking shopping cart. But to our surprise, the truck driver was infected with ligma, so I had to make him lick my balls and then proceed into the papier-mâché mall, filled with papier-mâché enemies and non-papier-mâché guys with a flamethrower, and also whatever the fuck this is, and minotaurs. This place is weird, but once we get past it, we have a mission to accomplish, which is to beat this bitch Kevin James to the ground with the dead spirits of our band members. But before that, we get tased in an act of defilement, and the mall cop commits a cardinal sin of murdering two of his foster care members, which was against the contract terms and conditions, meaning he will never get his Yukawewe back. But because we are God and believe in fair punishment, we summon a confinement of organs from all the harvesting I've been doing as a quest, and not at all because I'm psychotic. And we will use these organs as a repentment for all the innocent souls Paul Blart too murdered in cold blood. And in doing this, we can enter hell and fight our way through hundreds of demon hordes and the game's physics, and then go and kill the real corporate behind this, which is Andy Fickman, the director behind that horrendous sequel of a movie. And as God, I finished this in the most fitting way possible, with a Glock. Now with this, we can finally rest from all the terrible movies Kevin James has... What the fuck even? Fuck. No. 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 Not again. Fuck!